And so that was the moment when I was like, I'm going to do my own thing. And I don't care what my parents say. I don't care what my community says. Like, I got to do me, because tomorrow could be your last day.
Hi, you guys. Nice to have you on Owning Your Legacy.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And I love that you're local, and this is just, we love this city, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, I'm sure. So I would love to start with sharing your stories, both of your stories, and then I want to hear about your love story. So don't forget about that.
Hi, I'm Amy Kadens, chairperson of the Kadens Family Foundation, and I call myself a diaper equity advocate. Pete and I both were raised in Toledo, Ohio. Grew up together, didn't kind of reconnect until we graduated college and moved to the city. But went to school at Miami of Ohio and Oxford in early childhood, came out of college as a preschool teacher in the city, and moved to sales when I couldn't afford to pay my rent, sadly. And then, as Pete likes to say, retired very early. But my love for early childhood has always remained. And in 2011, I founded an organization called Share Our Spare, which connects families that have new and gently used items with families that do not. And today it's a bustling organization. I actually just wrote off the board after 10 years, but we have a warehouse off of Irving Park and have since distributed 10 million items over the longevity of our existence. And through that work kind of is where my eyes were opened to diaper need, which is now my current life's path. So that's the journey that I'm on now.
And I love how you talk about the pitfalls when families don't have diapers. It was rather astounding and something that's honestly I didn't think of. So maybe touch a little bit on why it's so important.
Diaper need, of course, I'm assuming you and me both, we were fortunate enough never to wonder where our children's next diapers were going to come from. But through my work with Share a Spare, I saw all sorts of things, Mountain Dew in bottles, children sleeping in unsafe conditions. But diaper need struck me and changed me forever. Parents reusing diapers, bleaching them, using T-shirts. And the astounding fact is even today, one in two families cannot afford to provide a sufficient supply of diapers for their children. And it's not just a diaper, I always say. What that means is if you don't have enough diapers, you cannot send your child to daycare. If you can't send your child to daycare, you can't go to work to collect a paycheck for your family. Mm-hmm. Diaper need is one of the leading causes of maternal depression. Children don't sleep well when they're not in, a sturdy enough diaper. There's a huge correlation between diaper need and abuse and neglect. The list just continues to grow, and nobody knows about it. It's a very hidden symptom of poverty. But the truth is, most families that are experiencing food insecurity are also experiencing diaper need.
They're expensive.
They're very expensive, and there's no government assistance. You cannot use WIC or SNAP to purchase diapers, which is horrible and something that I'm really working to change. And Illinois is one of the states that has proposed legislation. Right now, Washington State and California have diaper stipends. A lot of states are now eliminating taxes on diapers, but it's just not enough.
It seems like common sense, what you're talking about as far as that goes. And so if you sent your child to daycare in a cloth diaper, do they not take them?
No, and it's illegal to launder cloth diapers at public laundromats. And cloth diapers are expensive. It's like a Costco membership. You have to come out of pocket a lot of money to get, the kit. And a lot of families don't have that. And a lot of families don't have access to washers and dryers.
And not to mention, it's just, my mom did cloth diapers for 7 children, and I'm like, wow. Thank God for disposables.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of work.
There's a correlation between access to disposable diapers and women returning to the workforce.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense because the daycares, they probably couldn't handle that with all the kids that they have. There's just no way. Right. So great story. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Pete?
First, I'll say I'm so proud of my wife for her hard work and her vision around this has been incredible. She's really found her own voice in the philanthropic space, and it's been awesome for me to watch. I've long been the person who gets the credit and the fame and the praise, and to have that transition a little bit, so she's getting the credit and the praise, has been awesome for me to.
I heard there was an award this weekend that was announced.
Yes,
Oh.
I'm in Sheridan Road's Power Women issue, which has been really fun.
Nice.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
congratulations.
Thank you.
So a little bit about me. Also grew up in, Amy and I grew up in a little 4,000 person village outside of Toledo. And so we grew up knowing one another. Her older sister was one of my best friends. I was a 3-sport athlete, a very good basketball player, went to college originally to play basketball, Division I at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania. And found my way into certain leadership roles, and just loved being a leader. I always tell people I was the president of my class from 3rd grade to 12th grade. And then I was the president of the interfraternity council system at Bucknell, where I went to school. I just always kind of gravitated towards leadership. Mm-hmm. And after college, I went into investment banking for all the wrong reasons, mostly greed. Just wanted to work on Wall Street, wanted my parents to say their kid worked on Wall Street. My parents didn't come from means. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a elected official. So really civically engaged people who cared about their community, but not people who made a ton of money. But they endowed me with some characteristics around leadership and around courage and around just caring about other people. I'd say like one of the biggest catalysts in my life was also probably the worst thing that ever happened to me. I sustained a personal tragedy in 9/11. I lived in New York after college. My best friend from college died in 9/11. And so
Sorry.
I'm sorry too, but I also weirdly think that was the most catalytic thing that ever happened to me. And I talk to people all the time who come to me with their challenges or problems, and I always remind them that there are 2 paths you can take when something traumatic happens to you. You can decide you want, to leverage this experience to propel yourself, or you can let it destroy you. Right. And I was just hell bent on at that moment when they lowered Brad's casket 6 feet deep in the ground. I knew at that moment that I was going to take over writing my own life story again. Because I think what happens to young people a lot of times is we let society write our life story for us. Society, because you have a certain degree from a certain school, wants you to go into consulting or finance and make a certain amount of money and make everyone proud. And the truth is that Brad, my buddy, wasn't living his life. He was living someone else's life when he was, slaughtered. And so that was the moment when I was like, I'm going to do my own thing. And I don't care what my parents say. I don't care what my community says. Like, I got to do me, because tomorrow could be your last day. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Chicago, where my older brother and older sister were. This is in 2002. And I started my first business with $6,000. Subsequently, I started 5 businesses over the next 17 years. I took 2 of them public. I employed about 6,000 people. I'm very, very proud of the teams we built in those companies. And other than the restaurant that I started, which was a disaster, now
That's the hardest business to start.
Yeah,
they
I know.
Say.
I was like, I had 6,000 employees, and somehow, some way, I managed to take those companies public. And then I had 37 employees at a little restaurant, and that failed. But we're opening another one here in 6 weeks, which I think is actually going to work. So
what's that going to be?
It's have you all heard of honey butter fried chicken? Some of you may have been a honey butter fried chicken.
Yes.
So Amy and I bought into honey butter fried chicken, and we're opening one in Glencoe, where we live.
Awesome. That'll be fun.
So I am very, very proud of the fact that all the organizations that I've started with a great team of people are still sustaining organizations, employing, lots of people. Because I believe in life we need to do things that are sustainable, not just kind of the optical illusion of, hey, I started something and you got to finish the job. And finishing the job means it survives well beyond you. So that was a little bit about me. I have a whole host of other stories about how I engage in philanthropy. Probably the one that's most germane. In 2008, I had just sold my first business, and I was about to get married to Amy, and I met a homeless man on the street. And I always say the next 45 minutes changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. Because what had happened, we were here in the West Loop in Chicago, and it was freezing rain out. It was April 28th, and so it was kind of a weird day for it to be that inclement weather. And there was this guy, I was in my Mercedes. Again, I just sold my company, so I was, kind of thinking I was all that in a bag of chips. And I had this big boat Mercedes, and there's this guy sitting 15 feet from me in the freezing rain. And I just went out and said, "Hey, man, you want to join me in my car?" And just warm up a little bit. And he was pretty reluctant at first because many people in the homeless community feel very suspicious of folks for good reason. But after convincing him that I was normal and not trying to take advantage of him, he joined me in my car. And the next 45 minutes, what I learned is that homelessness is not always some permutation of addiction or mental illness or someone who's a veteran. This guy, what I learned in that moment was misfortune plays no favorites in this life.
Right.
And so I went on. He was a vendor at Streetwise here in Chicago, which is one of the largest homeless aid agencies in the country. And I went on to become the chairman of that board for 10 years. And that's kind of what started. Because of him and because of what I learned about these people and about their misfortune. And, I've spent, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but I've spent much of the last 15 years of my life thinking about something that I talk about often. And I talk about paying it backward. Some people talk about paying it forward. Mm-hmm. But I'm more focused on the notion that someone suffered so I could succeed. In fact, legions of people, communities of people suffered so I could succeed.
And I think you should touch on that. I really found that it opened my mind when you were talking about the war on drugs and going back to that. I remember that vividly. Mm-hmm. And it was a whole different perspective that I had never thought about, and how that translated when you did sell, that you talk about on the shoulders of others.
Yeah,
I love that story.
I always say I got lucky. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most amazing human. I found myself in the right places at the right times. I did co-found and ran the largest cannabis company in the world. It's now a $4 billion business. But if you made the fortune that we made in the cannabis industry and you look yourself in the mirror every morning and you think it was all you're full of hubris. Mm-hmm. You're an idiot, frankly. And so I look myself in the mirror and feel like I have some reconciliation to do, because I came along 5, 10, 12 years later on some kind of like idiosyncratic state legal construct for marijuana. And the people who were the entrepreneurs who took the biggest risks, who built the industry, mostly black and brown folks, did the same thing I did, right. But they got catalyzed into generational poverty and into the criminal justice system for it. And so I have to look at my life and say, if not for them, mm-hmm. building the foundation for what the industry became, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be interviewing. You wouldn't even you would have no interest in interviewing me, if not for them. So that's why I'm so focused on going back into those communities and repairing the damage done.
Reading up on both of you guys, I kept going by the grace of God go I. Yeah. It's like one of my favorite, and not even like necessarily religiously, but it's a lot of what you both talk about is the obligation to philanthropy when really many of us have been very lucky. And
I sometimes people throw around that term self-made, mm-hmm. which I just think is a totally bullshit term, right. Because I'm not self-made and I'm not rich. I didn't grow up rich. Sometimes people equate like self-made. My parents didn't have a lot of money and I built it all myself. That's bullshit. Yes, yeah. The truth is that I could take the best idea and I could move to Rwanda and it's not going to come to fruition, or Libya or Chad. We live in a country where there's infrastructure to be a capitalist and an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. There were people around me, my high school basketball coach. One of the first things I did when we came into Meaningful Wealth is I went back and I paid off his mortgage. And I named
that is huge.
We named the basketball court after him. And we built
and how did he feel? What was his
unworthy? John Coach Lindsay is a very humble guy. But the truth is that there was some stuff that happened in my upbringing that I won't get into, but where I had some challenges, and he stepped in as a surrogate. And,
coaches are amazing. Yeah. I mean, my kids are athletes, as we talked about before the show, and I am forever grateful to a lot of coaches, and just the impact and influence on kids' lives is
And that's why I'm
huge.
a coach now too.
That's great.
So I actually coached a team to the Final Four last year in basketball because it is not. I didn't need to do it, but it's all about paying it backward.
On that note, I was reading, you were saying that one of the hardest times of your life was right after you sold.
Yeah.
And I'd love you to touch on, because I think there's a lot of people that get that. It's like purpose, without purpose, how do you carry on?
Yeah, I think I had a major identity crisis. I was known as when I made the announcement I was leaving. Steve Daniels, who's a journalist here at Crane Chicago, said, and I'll never forget this. He said one of the greatest Chicago entrepreneurs is leaving the game at the age of 40, and I felt like immediately I was washed up. I was a has-been, and that was really tough for me to digest. But I think probably bigger than that, and I've written about this many times and talked about this many times, is the notion of the different permutations of wealth and how I was so busy focusing on the one permutation of wealth that we all talk about, which is bank account wealth, and kind of simultaneously disregarding other forms of wealth, community wealth, relationship wealth, health wealth.
Right.
And it was painful because I came to the realization that while yes, I had achieved what most people see as the pinnacle of success, built $1 billion company, took it public, I'm rich, but at the same time very juxtaposed because I'm very relationship poor. So if you have a lot of money but you got no one to share it with, what's it worth?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to kind of get back to focusing on my relationships with my family and my friends and my community, and that was a tough transition because, I'm not going to say people I would say, and Amy would probably agree, I don't think people accepted me back overnight.
Right.
It was a little bit of a transition to be
Probably
welcomed back.
pay some dues.
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly.
And I find that interesting. My mom is a Jungian therapist. She's 89 now, and she had her own practice, and she always said the hardest clients that she ever had were trust fund babies that had no purpose. So I'm really curious from both of you how you are raising your kids to not be a trust fund baby, like whatever comments you have on that, on how, helping our listeners even of how do you instill work ethic? How do you, so talk about that a little bit, Amy. I think that I'd love to hear your perspective.
I think first of all, we live in a beautiful community, and probably its biggest downfall is no diversity. But thankfully, by the nature of the work that Pete and I do, we have exposed our children to lots of it. We have all sorts of people at our house all the time for dinner, friends from streetwise vendors to dignitaries and the whole gamut in between. They know, and I think it's unique because of the work we do, they know what it means to give back and to work really hard to help others. But that is a challenge, and we talk about it a lot. Our children are growing up way differently than Pete and I did. We both didn't grow up with lots of money, and we both had beautiful childhoods. So we talk about it a lot at our house.
Yeah, I think that we work hard to put our children into places and spaces where they feel vulnerable and uncomfortable. I think that one of the things about trust fund babies is their parents never put them into a spot where they have to feel discomfort.
Yes.
Because that's what having a lot of money is about. I never have to feel uncomfortable again. I'm a big believer in vulnerability and self-awareness. And so give you one tangible example that maybe the listeners can take home who may have similar concerns with their children. I take each of our children on a trip every year, independent of Amy and their other siblings. I think that's really important for a dad to do. And especially, I've historically speaking been around a little bit less. So my parenting has been a little less, robust, let's say. But I want those 3 or 4 days every year with that kid. We have 3 children. But the deal is this, we'll go, I'll take you to LA, and which my youngest wanted to go to last year. And I took her, and we went to Malibu. And we went to Nobu and had sushi, on the ocean. But the next day, and she knew it was coming, we're going to go and we're going to take a tour of Skid Row, which has more homeless people in a square mile than any other place in the entire country. And she was scared, shitless. And but that's good.
That is
And
good.
I filmed her reactions to all the stuff we were seeing. And then 4 weeks ago, I took my son to Santa Fe. And yeah, we stayed at the Four Seasons and we did some magical stuff and we did some hiking. But we had to go to a Indian reservation and we got a tour of an Indian reservation where
Beautiful.
poverty and alcoholism are pervasive. And I'll never forget this. We were talking to the chief and I said, how much are these homes on the reservation worth? Like, is there some sort of economic value? If I wanted to buy a home on an Indian reservation, how would I do that? How much does this house cost? And my son heard him say this. He said, Pete, we don't think of economics in that way. We think that economic value is derived from family and community and prayer, not from, bricks and mortar. And just to have my son see the poverty, see the suffering, but to hear him say that what mattered was love and community.
Yeah,
So
connection.
it's just exposing your kids to stuff
Yeah.
and not letting them get off easy.
I love that. And you talk about that trip you took when you were young with your dad, and I think you're so right. It's like they can live lives like that, and you see it on all sorts of different media of like TikTok. They're doing dances in there, and you know that they don't have the next meal maybe, but they look so happy. And it's almost like the flip side. Too much money can make you incredibly unhappy.
Yeah.
And having that, and I love that what you do with your kids. I think that's one of my beliefs too, is I love the trips and the moments I get with my children because we all work really a lot. And that's like the connection time and the experiences and the memories. Priceless, it doesn't matter if you're camping in an RV, which I love to do, or what you're doing, but it's that time together.
Absolutely.
I think we do a pretty good job. I'm sure we could do a better job is showing people humanity. I mean, even the mothers that I work with at Share or Spare, they are just like me. They
Yes.
want better for their children than they had for themselves. They want to provide. We're all just people. I mean, truly, it sounds so cliche. It is true.
Yeah.
The Hope kids we have over, or the Streetwise vendor, they're families. They want to sit at a dinner table and talk about their day. I mean, we are all just one bad break away from finding ourselves in a terrible position, and we're all the same. And I think that is a huge task to continue reiterating to our kids.
Right. And I also think sports help a lot with those coaches holding those kids accountable. As a mother, I'm so grateful for. And I have 5 boys, so making young boys into men is really helpful.
Absolutely.
And doesn't matter how much money you have. If the coach says, "Be here," you're here. It's really teaches them. And they do a lot of charity work too, which is great in sports, which I think is fantastic. We love, and as a family, we love Feed My Starving Children is one of my favorites.
Yep.
And as a company, we do that too. It's the videos get you right there. I mean, they're tear jerkers from the minute you walk in, and you feel so impactful. And then they tell you how many kids you fed for how long. You're like, well, that was 2 hours well spent.
Absolutely.
And they play music, and then you get competitive because you're like, what table can beat the other table? So that's kind of fun. So I kind of skipped over. I still want to hear your love story, you guys. So I get that you grew up together.
Maybe different
and then-
versions.
Okay, different. That's awesome. I love that there's different versions. So yeah, so your sister was his good friend, and then what happened?
Amy, I think, didn't prefer me growing up.
True.
I'm 4 years older, so I was a senior when she was a freshman. And look, let's just be honest, when you're a senior and you're a 3-sport captain and class president,
For the last 15 years?
you
He's
think
not
you're
short on confidence.
you kind of think you're a baller. And I'm sure I probably acted a little arrogant, but she was a cheerleader, so she was always in the buses with us and whatever, and her sister was a cheerleader as well, and so we knew each other. We grew up. Our parents were close. My parents and her grandparents were very close friends. They're of the same generation, and our phone numbers were one number apart.
That's a sign.
So in a 10-digit phone number, 1 digit apart. and people we got calls for each other all the time. People conflated our numbers.
Oh, that could be dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. So there were lots of coincidences and interesting interactions in our life, and we ended up at a dinner together in New York City one night after college, and with her family and whatever, and I somehow ended up at the table, and Amy
I
was
was annoyed.
Amy was
that Pete
annoyed
was
by
there.
that, but a couple years later,
Who invited him?
I was running my first company, and my friends and I from Toledo were throwing a mustache party where we would grow out our best mustache for the month and then award the Mustache King of Chicago. And
How fun.
and
Oh, I want to see pictures of that.
yeah, God, I hope we don't have pictures of that. I was a little under the influence. I think Amy says that was the last time she ever blacked out, and we ran into each other.
Don't tell my mom.
Yeah, exactly. And the rest is history. And
So you don't remember the night you guys got together?
I do remember we were, without getting too crass, we were in a cab on the way home together at 2 a.m, and she called her sister to say, I'm in a cab with Pete Kadens, and it's 2 a.m, and all I heard was her sister on the other end of the line yelling, "No!"
Were you like asking for permission, Amy?
No,
anyway?
I remember vividly being at Stanley's bar. It's no longer. It's an awesome bar in Lincoln Park. This is way before Pete and I got together. And I remember seeing Pete at the bar, and I remember specifically walking the long way to the bathroom so I didn't have to run in and talk to him. And giving my friends advice. I remember this one girl liked Pete. This is a few months before we started dating, and I was very sincere in saying, no, do not. Like, that is not a bad news. And then 2 months later, I'm madly in love with him.
What did your girlfriend say after that?
I don't know. It's just so
She's like,
ironic.
"Oh, you were distracting me so I wouldn't get the
Yeah.
guy you really like."
No, this is way before the mustache
She
party.
probably
but
thinks now that you knew exactly what you were doing.
I
It's very
promise.
It was
premeditated.
strategic.
It was fate. It was all fate.
So what do you guys think is the most important? I mean, I'm curious of both working together successfully and your foundation together. So what do you feel is, the root of a great partnership? What would you say is the most important aspect of your relationship?
I think Amy and I are still working on that, right? I mean, we were always iterating and learning about how to become better partners, not only in life, but also in business and in our foundation work as well. But I think one thing that we have that is pretty unique and that I think accrues to our benefit is an unwavering degree of authenticity. We say what we mean what we say, and we just come out with it. There's not a lot that's kind of passive aggressive between us. Amy is extremely persistent, and she gets what she wants, and she's demanding, and so am I. Mm-hmm. And I think our relationship has blossomed in so many different ways because of our ability to speak truth to each other.
That's huge. That's huge.
All right. And we're in a very wonderful growth period. I mean, for the first 10 years of our marriage, when Pete was working and I was home with 3 babies, was not all rainbows and sunshine.
Hardest period of our lives.
We've really evolved, and I'm very grateful for even when Pete, retired and was going through personal challenges of kind of finding his identity. That was a dark time for us. And to our credit, we've really been working hard. We have an amazing therapist that I love and wish I could
All
put her
of
in my
us need a
pocket. Yeah,
therapist.
but she's really just cracked us open in a way that we never would have looked through that lens on our own. We just couldn't have gotten there on our own. So it's been very interesting and a journey, but
You
enjoyable.
learn so much,
Yeah,
right? I know.
I think one of the other key words between us is, and we've learned this is a learned skill because
Polar opposites.
we didn't have this.
But that's polar opposites is great.
Right, it is. We didn't have this at first, but the word is compassion. Mm-hmm. We have compassion for each other. She understands some of my struggles and what I go through, and she gives me a little wiggle room to kind of deal with that. And I feel the same with her.
And it's so hard to see your partner struggling and support, or your child. Mm-hmm. It goes both ways, and to really know how exactly you're saying to give some space, let them go through it because they have to go through it on their own, and just stand witness sometimes.
Right.
Yeah. I think I'm just meeting you guys today, but I just see like mutual respect too. I would
Lots
throw
of it.
in that mix of it's evident. And
Yes.
that's huge. You got to have that. So I would really like you guys to describe Hope Chicago to our listeners because I think it's a fantastic, fantastic program and sounds like it's been hugely successful in
Very
a very
successful.
short period of time. And a gala last night that sounds like it was great. So tell us more.
Right. So, as I mentioned, I was a chairman of the largest homeless aid agency in Chicago for a decade. And one of the frustrating things for someone who's ambitious and who's experienced a lot of success in business is that you want a degree of gratification. And unfortunately, in the homeless space, gratification is often delayed or permanently withheld because the truth is that the average profile of a person we help here in Chicago is a 47-year-old male of color who has a felony criminal history. And by the time we get to that person, what we can do for them is only marginal. We can sustain them. We can put a roof over the head. We can help get food on the table, maybe even get them into a program where they learn how to take on a menial skill and get a job. But we are not creating wealth out of these people. We are not sending them back to college to completely reinvent themselves. It was frustrating to me that we couldn't take these people and create this metamorphosis in their lives. So I decided when I retired that I needed to go downstream. I needed to get to people before they got into a position of helplessness. And so I decided that I was going to focus on education and educational access, given the rising cost of college and given the number of Black and Hispanic students who can afford college, which is very few, frankly, and the debt they're saddled with afterwards. I felt like that's a space that I needed to get into. And so, like I do with everything, I studied the landscape pretty carefully. I traveled to 15 cities around the country, from Denver, Seattle, Kalamazoo, Pittsburgh, studying these promise programs where kids at a certain school system and a certain geography get to go to college for free. And at the same time, I felt like I needed to get proximate to the problem. Proximity is a big word for me. I think there's nothing worse than a rich white guy who goes into an underserved minority community and tells them how to do their job, and doesn't listen and just provides solutions maybe that they don't even want. So what I did is I went into Englewood, and on a part-time basis, I struck a deal where I taught a course on entrepreneurship to juniors and seniors in Englewood. That school, Johnson College Prep, ended up being the school that was featured on 60 Minutes
I
last
did
year.
see it. It was fantastic.
And, I really connected with these kids and I learned some really important lessons. On the first day, I asked these kids, how many of you have been directly impacted by gun violence? There were 21 kids in that first class. 14 of them raised their hand. That's 2/3 of the class. That to me was remarkable because before the July 4th thing in Highland Park, if you had asked that same question up where we live in the northern suburbs, zero would have said.
Right.
So, and then what I also learned is like what we are creating is a lot of one generation anomalies. Because what you would hear from these kids is, I'm leaving, I'm found a pathway out, I'm going to University of Michigan, I am never coming back. And if we don't find a way to retain our beautiful talent, our underserved minority kids, and get them back to Chicago, back in their communities, reinvesting, reengaging their communities, this city will crater. And I love this city. And so I just decided I have to get into the space. So what I did is a kind of a beta test. Amy and I went to our hometown in Toledo, and I started a 500-person platform called Hope Toledo there, where I said, I got up in front of this audience of people in January of 2020, right before the pandemic, and I said, we're going to pay for all of you to go to college for
It
free.
is so fun. All the listeners need to watch that episode of the excitement and the tears and the joy of that whole 500 group of them, and the guardians and the guardians or the parents or the moms. Their reactions were just heart-wrenching, and it gives me chills. Like, how
me too.
fun
Me too.
to have the ability to do that. And the interviews after of the students, like there was one in particular, I don't remember her name, but she was like, there was no way I was going to college. And she was a smart, straight A. And she's like, I could get some grants possibly or do this and that, but there's no way. And I think back to our childhoods, it was not a question in our family of 7. You're going to college. And not that we had crazy money, but it just wasn't a question.
Right.
Like,
And I said that last night in my speech at the Hope Chicago Gala. What these kids don't have that my kids take for granted is an expectation of college.
that is profound.
Yeah. And
Because you're not going to work hard to get good grades if you're like, I'm never going to make it
right,
anyway.
yeah, exactly. I mean,
Why even go?
I always provide the analog to people. If you're a farmer and you're getting up at 4:15 every morning to plant and till the soil, and a month goes by, and 2 months go by, and months go by, and nothing's flowering, nothing's growing, eventually you're going to say, it's pretty stupid to get up at 4:15 in the morning. Like,
To what end?
And to what end, right? And these kids, in many cases, because the Darwinian nature of their upbringing, feel the same way. It seems inconceivable, like, given what's going on around them, that they can make it to college. And so we took those first 500 students. We told them they're going to college for free. When I say free, unlike almost any other scholarship program in the country, I meant free. I meant tuition, room and board, books and fees, surcharges. You were coming out with nothing. Most college scholarship programs are merely tuition-based. But then we took it a step further. I always say that part of my success has been the ability to zig while other people are zagging. And what I learned from this one generation anomaly thing that I talked about earlier is that these kids need an educational support system. I always tell people, I'm not trying to change educational outcomes. I'm trying to change dinner table discussions. Because when you change dinner table discussions, I know at my dinner table and her dinner table and probably your dinner table, it sounds like we talked about college.
Yeah.
We talked about education. That was a seminal piece of our upbringing. At these tables, dining room tables, family room tables, life is so Darwinian. They're talking about how to pay rent, how to make it to the next day.
How to buy diapers.
Or diapers,
Exactly.
right? And so to give these people the dignity of knowing they can go to get educated and they can talk about it freely because it's an opportunity now at their dining room table, and all the ripple effects of going to college. By the way, the number one sociological impact on whether you will, this is statistically proven many times over, on whether you will go to college or not is whether your older siblings did, if you're a younger sibling. 70% of people who go to college
true.
go because an older sibling went. And so we're not just setting the table for these kids, we're setting the table for the kids behind them too.
And I love how you talk about education too as so foundational. You can talk gun violence, you can talk, other issues that our city and many cities have, but I like how you landed on education.
We get so busy trying to solve symptoms.
Yeah.
Rich people, I hate to say it, mostly try and solve symptoms. And the reason is because symptoms are what makes them uncomfortable. Violence. I'm not coming to the city because I feel uncomfortable. I could get carjacked. No one, I can promise you, no one wakes up in the morning excited to go carjack somebody.
Right.
It's a economic reality. They do it to create economic value for themselves and their family. So to give them other opportunities, other access, dignity, changes, outcomes in a city. But again, we got to stop solving symptoms. We got to start solving the disease. The disease is that these people go through life and they don't believe that they have the same opportunities that their white, rich contemporaries have. And they don't believe that anyone cares about them or is willing to invest in them. And when you invest in them and you prove you care about them, light switch goes on.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're not going to go into a community and commit a crime. They don't need to because they have opportunities now. So that's to me the thing. That's why I don't think there's any panacea that would solve intractable issues in this community or any urban community around this country. But if there was one, it would be education.
So kind of back to your partnership and your guys' way you make this all work and mutual respect and the love of the city. So let's talk a little bit about, because when I was reading up, I went, Pete should be in politics. So we talked about this a little bit before recording, and I loved your comments and what you were saying. And I am not great at politics. I get very scared when people start talking politics because I don't want to misstep or say the wrong thing. And I, quite frankly, just it makes me uncomfortable. Politics just generally make me uncomfortable. And I don't feel educated. That's probably the basis of it. But I loved how we were chatting about how much we do love this city, and and what you were saying about if not me, then who, and that's what blows my mind, politically speaking, that the candidates that we get to vote on, I'm like, is this the best we got? Like, truly, when there's amazing people in the world. So I would love to hear you talk about, your thoughts around that. And I know this is kind of a fun issue for you guys to think about, but it's huge. I mean, and I'd love, Amy, I want you to chime in too on what the worries and concerns are.
Yeah. Yeah, I have long thought about running for elected office. Not sure where or when, but I definitely love this city and certainly love this state. It always bothers me when people built their organizations on the broad shoulders of the city, and then the first thing to do is leave. We're not leaving. We're not going anywhere. I ain't going to Miami, And people will say, well, what about the weather? Right? I mean, I always tell my kids.
We love the spring, though, don't we?
We live.
Man, do we? In Chicago, we love spring. Even though it's April or May by the time it gets here, but
in the doldrums of winter, it's good to get out and go to a warmer climate. But the truth is this: I always say this. It's always warmest where the community you love is.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so to think that I can move to Miami and be in sunshine every day and all of my problems will be solved, that's foolish. Because I don't have a community there. I don't have people I love there. I don't have family there. And also, we have a debt of gratitude to the broad shoulders of the city. I could not have done what I did in New York or San Francisco or probably many other cities around the country. The city is the most welcoming, kind, considerate place, and people pick up your phone call and they will help you.
True.
And
Midwestern.
It's good Midwestern values.
Yes, exactly.
Right. And so I don't know where I'll end up. I do have some reservations and concerns. I gave a speech in front of 2,500 people in March, and I reflected to Amy the next day that I got 2 standing ovations for that speech, and I reflected the next day that had the prior day before I delivered the speech, had I announced I was running for office, 40% of the audience would have hated me, and they would have disregarded me and said that everything I said was stupid. But because I was a private citizen.
And maybe that you had, and I don't know what the contents of the speech were, but maybe that it was for your own self-serving instead of this was just authentic.
So there is always a open-ended question of like, can we have more impact and more influence as private citizens or as public citizens? I don't know the answer to that yet, but I do know that whatever Amy and I do, we want to continue to make a heightened degree of impact in this community. Right. So we're going to continue to evaluate how we do that.
Gotcha. And talk a little bit about what your concerns would be, because I think, absolutely valid, and it is a balancing act,
I think Pete would be an amazing elected official. None of this has to do with my belief in his talent. He moves people. He does. I've seen it 1,000 times. And every speech, people come up to him and swarm him and want to talk to him and tell him to run for office. And my reservation is just quality of life. Yes. I mean, no privacy, digging into every corner of everything for everyone to see. I am a very private person. I really need that. So it's kind of and on the flip side, I know he'd be wonderful. But like Pete said, there's so much red tape in politics. Yes. And we are making way more headway as private citizens than we ever would.
Mm-hmm. And it's a shame it has to be that way.
It is.
It really is a shame.
And it's a shame, too, that, one of the things I've always told people, prospective political advisors who I've talked to, is like, if I do this, I'm going to be my authentic self. And I've said, for example, I'm not going to run polls. I'm not going to read polls because polls are bullshit.
Yeah.
Because all polls do is inform the candidate what he or she should say.
Yeah. Not
what they actually think. Because the goal is to win. And look, I get winning. I love winning more than anybody. But I'm not going to do it in a manner that would sacrifice my authentic self.
Yeah.
And so
I think there's so many people hungry for that.
Exactly. I think so too. And so, but all the advice, Pete, you have to pull. No, I'm not going to pull if I run, because I don't care what people want me to say. I care what I believe. And what I believe and what I'm working on and what we're not going to stop doing is every single kid, I'm 46, Amy's 42. I don't know by what age I'm going to accomplish this, but whether I run for office or not, every single kid in this city will have the capacity to go get educated for free, before I'm done with my time in Chicago.
That is a huge, audacious, beautiful goal. I love that, and I know you've had great success so far, and I think you're getting there for sure. So congratulations.
Thanks.
That is very big. I want to just touch on one more thing, and then we'll get into our final question. But I loved when you were talking about, it was your TED Talk, which is beautiful, and I think you a couple times touched on
I have
it.
another
and
one coming up next week.
You do?
Yeah.
What's the topic of that one? Hope. Is it going to be hope? or-
This is about how I believe U.S. corporations should be funding our education system.
That sounds very intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm into that. This one though, it kind of hit me close to home. I had a situation in college that reminded me of what you were talking about. But you were saying how many incarcerated people are in jail for nonviolent crimes, and just like the effect of their life after is profound. So touch on that a little bit about the problem with the whole system in that regard.
Yeah, the 1994 crime bill was the most racist, bigoted, disgusting piece of legislation ever signed. Unfortunately, our current president was a co-sponsor of that bill, and I have questioned him on that personally. Amy and I were on a Zoom call with him and directly when he was running for office, and I asked him directly about that. And we changed the seizure laws in this country in such a way where local police are incentivized to seize assets from their community, because the more they seize, the more money goes into their patrol cars and their uniforms and their salaries. So it's a very perverse incentive. And so the system is rigged. And I think we have a major issue in this country conflating what is actually a public health issue versus what is a criminal justice issue.
Right.
I know many addicts. And you can imagine, in the business I was in, building the largest legal drug company in the United States, that I saw many people who were struggling with addiction and were in fact using cannabis to ramp off of an opiate addiction. These people are not criminals. They do not belong in a cage. They belong in a wonderfully funded, thoughtful rehabilitation program. And our rehabilitation programs in this country suck. And if you don't believe me, believe the statistics. The statistics are that 3 out of every 4 people who go into inpatient addiction treatment end up either dead or back. So the system doesn't work. In fact, I am starting a business in that space as we speak. And so I believe what needs to happen with the criminal justice system as it relates to drugs is we need to completely reconstruct how we think of it. And we need to think of drugs and drug addiction, and even in some cases drug dealing, as a public health concern, not as a criminal justice concern. I am all in favor of throwing the book at anyone who's a violent criminal. And I think that's one of the things we should do here in the city of Chicago.
Right.
Throw the book at them. I don't care how long, if you abuse your spouse, if you assault somebody, if you rape somebody, certainly if you murder somebody, you're done, in my opinion.
And I loved your comment of, one bad decision doesn't define you.
We are all better than the worst decision we ever made. I made plenty of them, and I know I'm better than those decisions. How many times have you sent a nasty email and then you regret it?
Right.
And that shouldn't define you. But unfortunately, if you're poor and you don't have access to a good lawyer, it often does define you. So the system is rigged against people who are poor and who are addicted. And we need to do something about that. Portugal, last thing I'll say on this is Portugal has done an incredible job. 17 years ago, they decriminalized all drugs. They took all the money, billions of dollars a year they were spending incarcerating addicts, and they redeployed it to treat them. And lo and behold, guess what? Addiction's down 68%. Wow. So it proves the model.
Think
can
of
be done.
that, of just the cost of incarcerating these nonviolent crime individuals and what we could do with that.
Yeah.
That's brilliant model. And why do we not look to the models that are working? It's like
5% of the world's population and 94% of the incarcerated people.
Wow. So I'd really love to hear, and separately, the legacy that you guys would like to leave behind, because I bet it's different for each of you, I would imagine.
I think for me, I want to leave this world better than I found it. For me, specifically relative to the diapers, I want to, ultimate is changing legislation, which it's like climbing Mount Everest. So
You're going to be the politician.
maybe.
Maybe.
This is all a game.
Maybe.
No, but truly, I mean, this is such a simple, relative to the diapers, I don't want people to think, oh, that's so cute. It's not cute. It is a basic need, and it is a game changer, truly. It's a game.
And I agree with you. It's simple. It seems like common sense. And the more you get the word out and you can get people behind you going, change this. I mean, we are citizens that should be able to say that.
It's a force multiplier for better everything. Public health, yes. Mental health, physical health, education, communities. So that is my current purpose in life, is to just help families be able to access and afford diapers, because it truly will make a world of difference. These children that, it affects education too. Like I say, Pete and I are very different. Our values are the same, and we are tackling this issue from totally opposite poles. So somewhere we're going to...
But it's connected.
It's connected.
It's definitely connected.
And I just, want to show our children the value of hard work, the value of caring deeply about your community. And, we're having so much fun. It's fun. And we're really enjoying life. So just...
And fulfilled. I hope you both feel very fulfilled by the impact that you're making. I mean, that's legacy stuff right there.
We do.
Very.
Good.
For me, there are two elements of my legacy that I'm looking for. One is very egocentric, and the other is more external facing. On the egocentric one, you ever talk to somebody and their parents are probably deceased, but the way they describe their parents is magical.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my dad was the most incredible guy.
Right.
He was just so giving, and some of it's bullshit, and they're just like they're making up this image of who their parents were. But there's some people who really think that way, feel that way, and their parents really were that magical. I want my 3 kids to talk about me that way.
Did you ever see the movie Big Fish? It's like one of
I don't
my...
remember.
Oh, you guys, this is a great movie. It's kind of old, but that was my dad. So he would tell stories like he knew Sophia Loren. Well, more than knew her. He had a love affair with her. But then he would say he met like Father Smith, who's like the guy that ran the orphanage. And he never knew which of the stories were the truth. But then at his funeral, that you find there's, oh my God, Father Smith is here. He does know him, Like, Sophia Loren did not show up.
So yeah, no Sophia Loren for me, but I want my kids to gloat when they talk about me, to
That's
really be
beautiful.
proud of me and my work and my efforts, and hopefully try and live up to those standards. The more external facing legacy piece is I want people to think about me in terms of action and action orientation. That there's that quote from James C. Maxwell where he says the biggest gap in the world is the gap between I should and I did. And I find that there are far too few people in this world who actually do shit. They talk a big game, they dream of it, but for whatever reason, when it comes to, they'll grade themselves on a very rigid curve when it comes to their career or their money making. But when it comes to like doing shit in the community, they're much more forgiving about how they grade themselves.
Interesting.
And
especially when it gets hard, when it's an uphill battle.
Exactly.
And it's, oh, that was too hard. Walk
Right.
away.
And so I want my legacy to be a leader who took action, who tried hard to achieve big, hairy, audacious goals, even when everyone told him he couldn't, and to set an example, a standard for the community that we've got to work together and collaborate and do hard things, and we got to stop talking about it and just get rid of the politics, get rid of the bureaucracy, stop committee meetings endlessly, just do it. And I hope that is my legacy.
I love that. And I loved when you were talking about your friend Brad and 9/11, and I was thinking that this Owning Your Legacy podcast started kind of around the concept of, I inherited, which really isn't the right word, but, I have a business that was passed on from my dad. So there's a lot, it's hard to step into those shoes. And just as you were talking about, what we want our kids to think of us as parents, but It was around, wait a minute, this is my time. This is my, and I know as parents, don't you want your kids to, like, he's in heaven now, and I know he's looking down going, exactly, this is, you do you, and that's what we want our kids to do too.
Absolutely.
So I liked your story of the 9/11 and that huge shift in you that was like, okay, I got to be me.
Yep.
And that was
Be
beautiful.
the author of I am the exclusive author of my life story. No one's ever going to take over that role.
And being courageous enough to own our legacies and do what we want to leave behind and instill that in our kids.
Right.
Oh, you guys, I forgot to ask you. So where can our listeners find you and how can they help with the causes that you are so passionate about?
Sure. They can find the organization that I'm chair of, Hope Chicago, at hopechicago.org. For this organization in particular, what's unique is that our family foundation is funding 100% of the administrative costs of the nonprofit agency. So every dollar donated at hopechicago.org goes directly to a kid in need and one of their parents and their educational scholarship. It costs us about $11,000 a year to fully educate a student. So think about that in terms of your donation if you're interested, but hopechicago.org is where you can find us.
Beautiful.
Yes.
And would love all your listeners to get involved in the fight for diaper equity. Mod Collective is an innovative new tech platform that allows parents to afford diapers in a dignified way. And you can find us at Mod Collective, that's MOD collective.org.
So you guys, is there anything that our listeners can do to help move the needle in terms of legislation on any of your causes?
Absolutely. The state of Illinois is 49th out of 50 states in terms of per capita education spending for post-secondary. And so calling your legislator, if you live here in Illinois, and telling them how important it is that they engage and think about funding more for educational access, that goes a long way because the legislators here really do listen to their constituents.
That's great.
For the diaper bills, I think also calling legislators and filling out witness slips. There is legislation that is currently proposed, and just offering support to our legislators that it's important will help push the needle.
I love that. And we need to know about these things because otherwise we don't even know what we're pushing our elected officials to do.
Right,
So that's
right.
beautiful. Well, thank you guys so much
Thank you
for
so much
joining
for
me.
having
It
us.
was a
It was
lovely
great.
conversation.